Okay. If this one doesn't go through, I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. There isn't another option listed. I keep thinking I must be missing something obvious. Like there's a box I didn't check or a setting I didn't see. The message I got this morning says that this is the last step before the record is finalized. I don't know what finalized means in this context. It doesn't define it anywhere. I just know that every time it gets rejected, more things stop working. Access, notifications, basic stuff. So I'm going to try to say this as clearly and in as much detail as I can, because that's the only instruction that actually repeats. The previous submissions were shorter. I tried to keep them to the facts, dates, actions, outcomes. Each time, the response was the same: incomplete. So this time, I'm not leaving anything out, even parts that didn't seem relevant at the time. For the record, my name is Daniel Andrew Klein. This is what happened. I worked on the 4th floor. Not high enough for a view, not low enough to hear the street, just high enough that you forgot what the weather was doing. The lobby always smelled faintly like pine-scented cleaner, no matter the time of the day. It was the kind of smell meant to suggest the forest could be just behind the glass doors, but it never really smelled exactly right. I never understood the corporate obsession with making sterile places smell like a forest. The badge scanner was mounted a little too high, so you had to raise your arm more than it felt natural. If you held it too low, it didn't read. If you moved it too fast, it didn't read either. Everyone swiped it the same awkward-looking way eventually. I guess muscle memory took over. The elevator doors closed quickly. Shiny metal walls that gave everyone the funhouse mirror treatment. No music. People avoided eye contact. Not deliberately, it just felt unnecessary, like we were all agreeing to save our attention for later. Or maybe after our second cup of coffee. In the mornings, I rode up with people from compliance review and vendor integration. I never knew what either department actually did. I just recognized faces and exchanged brief hellos that did invite conversation. At lunch, I usually took the stairs back down. I told myself it was for the exercise, but really, I just wanted to avoid seeing the same people and having to make small talk if they were feeling a little more awake. The 4th floor hallway was long and gently curved. You never saw the end of it when you stepped out, just the suggestion of where it might go. Corporate gray walls, light decor, carpet that looked new and worn at the same time. The exit interview room was at the far end, past workforce analytics, past internal tools. Internal tools had a glass wall, workforce analytics didn't. Their lights were almost always on. I never saw anyone go in, or out for that matter. The interview room itself was small. 2 chairs, a table bolted to the floor, no window. It sort of reminded me of a police interview room from one of those shows, minus the 2-way mirror. Slightly cheerier, with a stale, safe corporate artwork on one wall, abstract shapes and muted colors, nothing that could provoke a feeling. We used to have one of those inspirational posters, something about growth or momentum. Someone decided it didn't belong there. I kind of agree about that. The recorder sat in the middle of the table, already plugged in. A single unlit red light on top. I never turned it on until the other person sat down. Starting it while the chair was empty kind of felt impolite, like disrespect for the dead at a funeral. As you might have figured out, I conducted exit interviews. The company was a large one. Large enough that people referred to it by initials and emails, like that made it manageable. Most days I had 3 interviews, sometimes 4. They were scheduled in blocks, 15 minutes between them, enough time to reset the room, enough time to forget the last person. That was the point. If you've never been in one, Don't imagine it as a conversation. It isn't. It's more like a procedure. Fixed set of questions meant to end a relationship cleanly without leaving anything unresolved enough to come back later. Limit liability, ensure there's nothing else to be done but mail back the company credit card. But people still wanted it to mean something. They wanted to explain themselves or justify the decision or make sure someone understood what had gone wrong. I didn't stop them, but I didn't steer them either. Sometimes people cried. Sometimes they were angry. Sometimes they were oddly cheerful, like they were relieved to be done pretending. I treated all of it the same because the result was already set. The interview wasn't meant to change anything. It was a formality. Before every interview, I said the same thing. I said it the same way each time. This interview is being recorded for internal review. You're free to stop it at any time. There are no right or wrong answers. We're just interested in gathering honest feedback from our departing employees about their experience. Most people nodded. Some people asked if anyone would actually listen. I never answered that directly. I didn't really know. The questions never changed. Why are you leaving? What could have been done differently? Would you recommend the company to others? People answered them like they were being graded, even when they said they weren't. I listened for tone more than context. Tone told you whether they really meant what they said, if they were saying it through gritted teeth or not, if they were sincere or thinking about needing a recommendation down the line. People rarely said the unvarnished truth of it. Most gave me lines that sounded about as rehearsed and safe as my opening interview statement. Everyone had too much to lose by rocking the boat, even if they were the ones being thrown out of the boat in the first place. The most interesting and rare interviews were the ones where people decided to lob verbal bombs or burn the proverbial bridge. That's when you might hear the interpersonal details of the people behind the corporate veneer. Accusations of promotional favoritism because someone is allegedly sleeping with a higher up. Rumors of strip club charges on the company card being passed off as a work dinner. Hints of travel for work events that were really a company-paid vacation. I'd heard it all, some of it even turning out to be true. It still didn't change anything in the end. It didn't change their exit, at least for them. It might cause some other exits, though. When the interview ended, I thanked them. I stopped the recorder. I led them out of the room. I labeled the file. I noted any of the more interesting comments on the sleeve. I pulled the used tape and put in a new one. The old tape went with the file in the cabinet. I closed the room. Then I walked back down the hallway, every time. At lunch, I went to the kitchen. The kitchen was shared by the whole floor. 2 refrigerators, 1 microwave that always smelled like burnt popcorn, a coffee machine absolutely nobody trusted even though it was serviced regularly. There was a first aid cabinet mounted on the wall near the sink. It was badge locked. You scanned your employee badge, clicked open. You took what you needed. Whatever you took was refilled the next day. I always took an emergency packet, orange. I don't remember when I started doing that. It wasn't about vitamins. It was just part of the day, like morning coffee. It didn't seem to matter to anyone, at least anyone who had to refill it. I mixed it into a paper cup with cold water, drank it standing up, threw the cup away. If I didn't do it, my afternoon felt off. After lunch, I usually had another interview. Same room, same chair, same recorder, same preamble. I could say it without thinking. I'm sure I said it in my dreams some nights. Most days pass like that. Interview, hallway, kitchen, interview. I recognize people by where they sat in meetings, not by name. I recognize departments by lighting patterns on the ceiling, counting fixtures between rooms. I didn't think much about what happened to people after they left. That wasn't part of the job. It felt weird to get attached to anyone considering my role. The first time anything really changed was when facilities replaced the recorder. No announcement, no explanation. As far as I was aware, the old one never had an issue, but it just disappeared overnight. The new one looked almost identical. Same size, same weight, same red light. Only difference was no tape. It was digital and connected to an Ethernet port I never realized existed in the room. There was a small logo near the controls, Candlebright. I'd heard the name in passing, vendor this, integration that. Nothing that had anything to do with me. I chalked it up to it finally being our turn for upgrades. The first few sessions, nothing was different. The interviewee sat down. I pressed the button, the recorder light came on, and I started my preamble. One afternoon, during my second interview, I sat down and reached for the recorder. The red light was already on. I assumed I'd forgotten to stop it earlier. I shrugged it off. We started the interview. I said the preamble. Everything else went the way it always did. At the time, it didn't feel important. I remember thinking it was odd, but that was it. After the interview, I double-checked I turned it off. I had. At the start of my next session, the light on the recorder was off. I don't know why, but I relaxed a little bit, like it wasn't going to bite me after all. I laid out my materials as the interviewee entered the room, offered them a seat, and as they sat down, the recorder lit up. Perfect timing. I paused, then continued. It was helpful, but also unnerving. Later, it started turning on earlier, sometimes as soon as the door closed, once before either of us sat down. Each time I told myself it was learning, but what it felt like was that it was learning me. I thought about mentioning it to my manager, but what would I say? The new recorder was being too helpful? That it was doing my job of turning itself on? Did I want to sound threatened by a machine? So I didn't. I turned it off when it felt wrong, but it always turned back on at the start of the next interview. Eventually, I stopped fighting it. I told myself it was just doing its job, just like I was. The forecasting model arrived quietly. There wasn't a presentation, no rollout meeting, no announcement that this was going to change anything. It showed up the way internal tools usually did. First in documentation, then in menus, then in places you hadn't thought to look yet. It was described as a planning aid, a way to anticipate staffing gaps earlier, to smooth transitions. Some departments had been concerned about turnover. Tools to address that were framed as proactive, even responsible. I didn't think much about it at first. My job didn't change much. Same number of interviews, same room, same recorder. What changed was the archive. Instead of filing paper folders and tapes, everything was pushed digitally. Exit interview records were collected and stored in one location. It took me 2 days of training to get the process down. One afternoon, about a month after we started using it, I accidentally opened a personnel file for an employee who had a similar name to someone I was scheduled to interview the following week. As I realized my mistake, I saw something in the file. There was already an exit record there. Not performance notes, not HR documentation, a completed exit interview file labeled System Generated Record. I listened to it. There were questions, answers, timestamps. I checked the name again. The employee was still active, still attending meetings, still sending messages. I checked the date. The file had been created a week earlier. I assumed it was a template or a test file that hadn't been cleared. I closed it and went back to work. That explanation satisfied me for the rest of the day. A few weeks later, that employee resigned. They signed an exit interview. I conducted it. The answers weren't identical to the system-generated record, but the pauses were similar. The phrasing, too. The concerns came up in the same order. Afterwards, I sat at my desk longer than usual. It left me a little unsettled. Over the next month, these system-generated records became more common. They weren't attached to everyone, just certain people. At first, I tried to find a pattern, role, department, tenure. I couldn't. There was no flag, no explanation. I didn't raise it with my manager at the time. I told myself I needed more information, that if it was nothing, raising it would only waste time. I couldn't tell whether it meant the system was working the way it was supposed to or not working at all. Either way, it bothered me. When interviews happened, they usually ended close to what the system-generated record already contained. Over time, the generated records got more accurate. It became harder to tell the difference between the generated interviews and the real ones. Other than the voices, they were generic, flattened, close but not right. Uncanny in a way I didn't have language for yet. Eventually, I asked a question. Not because I wanted to challenge anything. Most people seemed to like the system. Because I needed to understand whether anyone was still listening to people. I started to feel redundant. I told myself you couldn't replace real interviews with generated ones. Audio files created by a system weren't an official record. Still, it bothered me how accurate they were. I brought it up with my manager, procedurally, by the handbook. He nodded, asked me to document it with legal. I emailed them. I described the system-generated records, the timing, how close they were to the real interviews, the issue with the official record. I asked whether their predictive behavior was expected, whether there was concerns about the system generating audio files. The response was polite. They thanked me for flagging it. They said the model had been reviewed, that the behavior fell within acceptable parameters. No action required. They almost sounded pleased. That stayed with me. A few days later, I went back to the archive. I opened the system-generated record I'd already reviewed. The application didn't load, just the endless cursor circle. I closed it and clicked again. It opened instantly. I told myself it was a glitch. In retrospect, I should have seen it for what it was. Not a glitch, a test. Things didn't break right away. They degraded. Calendar invites failed with small errors. Document edits reverted without comment. In some systems, my name simply wasn't there. My manager noticed before I said anything. He opened tickets, escalated them, forwarded me emails with subject lines like sync issue and Candlebright profile mismatch. IT responded quickly. Each system showed something different. In payroll, my profile existed but couldn't be edited. In access control, it was pending. In the HR system, it was marked complete. Complete was the word they used after someone had left the company. My manager sat at my desk one afternoon and tried to log in as me. He frowned. He tried again. Then he leaned back and rubbed his face. "This shouldn't be possible," he said. He said it quietly. He told me they'd reset my profile, that the system was ahead of the documentation, that these things happen during new integrations. A few days later, he stopped forwarding me tickets. Not because he didn't care, because nothing was resolved. And because, as he told me later, he started having small access issues of his own. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make him careful. After my bank card declined twice in 1 week, I called the bank. The hold music was familiar. I couldn't place it at first. Then the voice cut in. "Please hold. Someone will be with you promptly." Promptly, instead of shortly. I eventually got someone on the line. They couldn't find my account. I asked to escalate to a supervisor. The supervisor tried. She really did. She asked me to confirm details that no longer populated on her screen. Over and over, we tried different paths, different menus, different views of my profile. She paused longer each time. We got as far as seeing I did have an account at one point. Finally, she said, if I open a manual case on a record that won't resolve, my account gets flagged. I asked what that meant. She swallowed. She said she was sorry. The line went quiet. And then another voice came on. Thank you for using Candlebright Systems. Please remain on the line to rate your experience. After the bank call, I stopped treating it like an anomaly. I didn't do some big investigation. I didn't have to. I started noticing phrasing everywhere. Customer service emails from my utilities, compliance notices from government agencies, automated responses that pause mid-sentence before continuing. The words weren't identical. The rhythm was. The same soft apology, the same passive construction, the same assurance that everything was already in progress. I couldn't tell where one system ended and another began. That was the part that scared me. Not that it was everywhere, that it had quietly stepped over some line where a human could intervene, and no one seemed to notice it had happened. I was seeing someone. Her name was Anne. She worked in communications, which meant she noticed tone before content. I was terrible at lying to her. We met once or twice a week. Drinks, dinner, nothing dramatic. The first time my card declined, she laughed and paid. The second time, her banking app froze for a few seconds before approving the charge. She showed me the screen like it was a joke that hadn't landed. The wording was familiar. Later, her rideshare app asked her to confirm her identity twice. Her email prompted a security review after I forwarded her a message. She didn't panic. She just started watching me more closely. That's when I told her she shouldn't put my names on things. Subscriptions, reservations, anything official. She asked why. I told her it was temporary. A week later, I told her she shouldn't come over anymore. She asked if I was breaking up with her. I said no. I said it was a precaution, that I needed to keep my distance until I could sort out some things. That was the first time she looked scared. She didn't argue. The first time I went, it wasn't because I wanted help. It was because I was running out of time. My landlord had emailed me twice about the rent. Polite language, bolded dates, the kind of message that still pretended there was room for misunderstanding. My bank couldn't find my account. Payroll couldn't push anything to a profile marked complete. Every phone tree ended the same way, a courteous apology and an instruction to visit an office. They all gave me the same address. The building was low and tired looking, wedged between a licensing bureau and a closed dental clinic. The sign by the door was sun-faded and half peeled away. Inside there was a waiting room and a single counter with 2 people behind it. A hand-lettered paper sign taped to the glass read, "Please have documentation ready. Please be patient. We cannot access all systems." No one raised their voice. No one smiled either. Everyone held folders. Thick ones. The man next to me had a folder so swollen it barely closed. He looked like someone who had started shaving less often and then stopped keeping track of whether it mattered. I asked him if this place worked. He let out a breath through his nose. "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes it buys you a week." I asked what he meant. He tapped the folder with one finger. "They can submit continuity requests," he said. "That's what they call it. They feed the system a packet. Proof you're you. Proof you're not trying to disappear on purpose." He said it like he'd learned the words, but he didn't sound proud of them. He sounded like someone repeating directions. I asked why he kept coming back. He looked at me like this was the only question that made sense. My lease, he said. My kid's inhaler, utilities. He cracked the folder open just enough for me to see the mess inside. Printouts, IDs, letters with case numbers, screenshots of error pages. I brought all of this because they told me to, he said. First time, I thought that I showed up with enough proof, somebody would fix it. I asked if they did. He hesitated. Then he said, they fixed it for 3 days. 3 days? I said. He nodded. It came back, he said. My account, my benefits login. I could breathe again. He swallowed. Then it all slid away again, faster. I asked why. He stared at the counter, listening to the office like he'd done it 100 times. Finally, he said, because the system doesn't like being asked to make exceptions. He saw my face and corrected himself, like he'd caught himself sounding ridiculous. I mean, every time they send one of these packets, it puts a spotlight on you, he said. Not as punishment, just scrutiny. He leaned closer. The people here are trying to help, he said. They really are. But they're feeding requests into the same thing that's erasing you. I asked him what to say when it was my turn. He looked at my hands. I didn't have a folder yet. Just my phone and a few emails I couldn't open half the time. Don't tell a story, he said. Stories give a room to label you. He paused, searching for a simpler way. Keep it short, he said. Rent, medical, work. You need time, that's it. Then his number was called. He stood up, adjusted the folder in his hands, and took a step toward the door. Then he paused, looked back at me. One more thing, he said. I waited. If they fix it, he said, use the time. Then he went through the door. When my number was called, I stood up with nothing in my hands but my name, and I realized that might not be enough. The next day, back at the job I think I still had, I scanned my badge at the first aid cabinet. Nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. I held it there longer, like time would help. The cabinet didn't flash red. It didn't deny me. It just didn't recognize the attempt. That's when I knew something had shifted. Not a glitch, not a ticket. Something decided I was already on the other side of the door. That afternoon, I went back to the archive. I typed my own name into the search field. Nothing came up at first. I tried again. A result appeared instantly, like it had been waiting for the second attempt. System-generated record. Exit interview. Klein, Daniel. Dated a few days in the future. I opened it. The interviewer voice was mine. Not an imitation. Mine. The version of me that could say those words without feeling anything. The subject voice wasn't mine. At first. Too smooth, too careful. Then I got to the part where the system answered the question I always asked last. Whether they would recommend the company to others. And the voice dropped, not dramatically, just lower, thinner, like someone who'd stopped sleeping. Later, much later, I recognized it. It was my voice as it is now. A quiet acceptance baked in, tired, worn down. And that was the moment I understood what the recorder had been doing. It hadn't just been recording my interviews. It had been learning how I sounded when I stopped believing anyone was listening. The office I went to gave me a continuity token. That's what they called it. A temporary fix. A short window where things might work long enough for me to stay inside the lines. For 2 days, it worked. My bank app opened. My account appeared like it had been there all along. I withdrew cash. Not much. Enough to buy time, but not put a spotlight on me. I paid my landlord in person. He accepted, relieved, like the method mattered more than the money. I refilled my prescriptions. The pharmacist didn't look confused. I could breathe. On the third day, it started slipping again. My banking app loaded slowly, then not at all. The same error, different wording. My employer email stopped syncing. The continuity token didn't fail loudly. It just expired. And when I went back to the office, they told me the queue was 3 weeks out. They didn't say it cruelly. They said it the way people do when they've said the same sentence 1,000 times. I asked if there was an emergency option. The woman behind the counter glanced at my file, the thin file I'd managed to build, and then glanced away. I can submit another request, she said, but it might accelerate review. She didn't say what review meant. She didn't have to. So that's why I'm making this. Not because I have a clean ending, because I don't. I've tried what you would try. I've called the numbers. I've escalated. I've sat in waiting rooms. I've contacted my representatives. I've filled out forms that ask for information systems won't accept back. I'm running out of places that can even see me long enough to tell me no. If you're hearing this and you work anywhere near these systems, HR, compliance, IT, banking, government, I want you to understand something. This doesn't feel like punishment while it's happening. It feels like paperwork. It feels like delays, bureaucracy. It feels like it should resolve. And then one day, you realize you've been living on temporary fixes, continuity tokens, extensions, grace periods. And you start counting your life in days until the tokens run out. I can feel things narrowing now, slowly at first, then faster. Accounts timing out, messages failing to send, account requests that don't return an error, they just never complete. The world we live in runs on systems noticing you, recognizing you, confirming that you're still there. I don't know what happens when that stops. I only know that this recording was marked as required, and that if you're hearing it, then it went somewhere. Where that somewhere is, or whether there's a person on the other end who can still change anything, I don't know. I'm out of steps now. This feels like my exit interview.